All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Because Football podcast. This is your host, Coach Andrew, and today we have another fantastic guest. We have Steve Bauer, the head men's soccer coach and assistant athletic director at the University of Valley Forge. Steve, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Coach. It's obviously a pleasure to be on. I've get to know you over the last few years, so it's nice to finally be able to hop on and talk football with you.
Could you share with us some of your earliest memories and experiences of this beautiful game?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of guys, I think in our generation, it was one of the first sports that we played. Just because it was easy to do at recess or in the backyard, and whereas I feel like our parents' generation, it was kind of rare. There wasn't a lot of
Right.
rec, there wasn't a lot of youth, there definitely wasn't any club. Um, but for me, that was kind of the story. I think very similar to a lot of guys in my generation. Grew up playing at school, playing in the backyard, and playing rec soccer in my local AYSO club or team, I guess, at that time, and just really enjoyed it. My dad was my coach, and I played with the guys that I went to school with, and played with them in the fall. And we played basketball with that same group of guys in the winter, and then played baseball with the same group of guys in the spring, and then ultimately just kind of continued with that group. And half of us clung to soccer. Like that was what we ended up loving and spending a lot of the rest of our, you know, middle school and high school age playing and getting a little bit more competitively. Some of us into college as well. And some of us are now coaching college as well. So it's been cool to kind of see that kind of all going back to just, rec league soccer, starting super young and just having a fun time doing it.
Yeah, awesome. And with that core group of guys that you had played with, do you still keep in touch with them? Do you guys like still involved with each other? And then what are those relationships
Yeah,
like
yeah.
today?
I mean, it's a little bit different. Growing up, I grew up in Arizona, so now I'm in Philadelphia area. So
Hmm.
I don't really get to see them too frequently. But
Sure.
when I get back to that area, yeah, we're having dinner with those guys. We're checking in, going to weddings, and everybody's having babies and stuff like that now. So
Yes.
we're in that season of our lives, and so yeah, I'm still connected with those guys. And like I said, for probably five or six of those dudes now, we played every season, every sport, probably from age 7 all through high school. For so a better part of 10, 11 years, I
Hmm.
was spending every season with those guys. And we even played roller hockey in competitive leagues actually in Arizona. Not too much ice hockey going on out there, but
Yes, for
played roller
sure.
hockey with those guys too. So yeah, I mean, I think that's it built a lot of bridges. Ultimately, right, soccer was what took my heart and a couple of other guys. Again, some of those guys are coaching high school, coaching club. Some of them are coaching assistant coaches at schools, NAI schools back on the West Coast as well, which is pretty
Hmm.
cool to be able to talk shop. Uh, I'm the only one who does it, I guess, technically full time. I'm privileged enough to be in that part. But yeah, I think that's one of the things about the game is that it builds just so many bridges through culture and through a lot of different things, and it's constant. It's great.
Yeah, 100%. And it's cool that it's a group that you spend so much time with. Like if we think outside of our family, like who are the humans that we spend the most time with as coaches?
Yeah.
Now a lot of times it's our teams and players, but like growing up, I mean that amount of contact. It's just you guys literally grew up and went from little 7-year-old knuckleheads to 17-year-old knuckleheads together, and there's
That's right.
a lot of
I was
fun
gonna
there.
correct you. I was gonna correct you if you said it was anything other than a knucklehead. We were just older, right? We
Yes,
weren't any
exactly.
smarter. We weren't
More
any better.
dangerous, more
We were
capable. Yeah.
just older, man. Just older.
Yeah.
That's
And
great.
it's interesting you say like so many have ended up in coaching at various levels. Like that's a I think unique. Like I can think that a lot of my group of buddies that I grew up playing with, and I can think of like one other one that's coaching now at any level. So do you ever think like maybe what it was about that group that kind of led you guys all to do that, or what do you think it might have
Yeah,
been? Was
I
it
I
certain
mean,
influential coaches you had, or what do you think led to that?
well, I think that's it. I mean, I think I kind of alluded to it, right? We played a handful of different sports together, and when I think back to it and I look back on it, it was like one of our dads took the lead at each sport, right? And the other
Mm,
like three or four of those guys were the assistants. So like my dad was the soccer coach with my friend Brad's dad. Like they were the soccer coaches, and the other three dads were the assistant coaches. Then we went to basketball, and Nick's dad was the coach, and so was Brian's dad, right? And then we got into hockey, and so it just kind of rotated through. And I think a lot of those guys whose dads were the ones kind of running the show for us really stuck with it and just really loved it, and ultimately played the longest. Some of them are coaching different sports. They're not specifically in soccer. But like I said, some of us have kids now, and my oldest is 6, so she's playing, and some of them have kids that are around that age. So I don't know how much coaching is happening at age 6, to be fair. But we're all at different walks in that side of things. So I think the experience that was built through constant play was so helpful, right? And contrary to what a lot of our youth players are feeling now, like we played that in the fall. Like I mentioned, we played basketball together, pretty much the same team, but just a different sport. Then we're playing again with the same group of guys, baseball in the spring, and so I think that helped with the balance. I think a lot of youth and families are kind of pressured into going all out way sooner and centralizing or being sport specific. But I think the data would suggest otherwise. My experience, and I think the joy that comes from playing different sports and building new relationships with some guys that maybe you wouldn't have if you only just played in one sport. It's fun, I think, to be able to balance those things. And there's also benefits to each of those sports too, right? Like if you can read the game through the eyes of a point guard or a center or a wingback or a defenseman in hockey or a shortstop or a center fielder, right? Like if you can take those different lenses and apply them to anything, right? Like you're going to be able to see things with a kaleidoscope of perspectives as opposed to I play an attacking midfield. Like there's only so many different replications you can do in a training session. But if you play center field, that's antiquated to what it means to play a 6, right? If you can play, as a defenseman in hockey, that fits really, really well with playing an outside back, right, or a center back, because like they're taking the same types of angles, but it's a completely different avenue that you're having to take. So, that's probably a stretch in some capacity, but I think that's huge. And that was huge for me. And I think that kind of built the experience for all of our guys, like our friend group.
The debate about specializing or multiple sports, that's something that definitely is an important topic. But one thing you mentioned about like your youth friend group and things is that it seemed like for a lot of the guys, like they saw their dads coaching. And so I wonder if that had some impact on them becoming themselves like, hey, well, first of all, if my old man could do it, I can do it, right?
Right.
But also just like having that connection and kind of knowing what it's like. I don't know, but that's an interesting piece. For you, then, if I turn that to you, you said now your oldest is 6, she's starting to play. Like I don't have kids. I've been coaching in the youth game for over a decade, but I've always tried to be empathetic to the parents on the sideline. But at the end of the day, I have no idea what that feels like. Right. And so I empathize with the anxiety, with the excitement, with the stress, with the uncertainty, like all the things that parents are feeling. So for you now that you're watching your daughter, even though she's still just 6, like how does that change your view of coaching at least at the youth level?
Yeah, I think it's definitely changed my perspective even at the college level. But I think I have such a unique lens because this is my job. This is what I do. And then I go to my daughter's game. And so a lot of people are like, well, why aren't you coaching her team? And unfortunately, it just the scheduling is really challenging, right? When I'm able to go, I obviously don't want to step on the shoes of the saint who's volunteering, their time to care about. I'm there to support, and I'm good buddies with Abby's coach, and I said anything I can do to help, you let me know, even if that's bringing the goals back after the game's done. And but I never want to overstep, because that's not my role in Abby's life during that time, right? So I just have to, number one, just support whatever the coach is doing, because I'm a big believer in advocating for recognition of who's actually in charge of that moment of time. The same way I would empower Abby's kindergarten teacher, right? Like when she's there, that's the authority. That's who's in charge. That's who the most respect needs to be given, the most attention needs to be given. But the same thing happens on the sideline at a soccer game, and I think that is a huge thing for me, is recognizing and advocating for her, because she knows I'm a soccer coach. She knows that's my job. So she wants to ask me questions. And it's like, well, this isn't the time. We can do this at home. We can do this in the basement. We can do this whenever. You have a coach that you need to listen to and show respect and pay attention to. And there's a game being played as well sometimes if she's not aware. So it's like, come on. But I think that's, and even just the way that I cheer on the sideline, I'm really cognizant of, because I think the experience is valued, the social experience, as you talked about. Like there doesn't need to be any sort of pressure on her. So when I ask her how, if I miss the game and I ask her how it goes, did you have fun? Did you do your best? Did you try hard? And sometimes, especially early in the season, like, did you learn some of the names of your teammates? Did you make some friends?
Sure.
And just prioritizing the right things, I think at this time is super important for me and my wife. Like, we want to model that really well. We don't want to overemphasize scoring goals, or she loves playing goalie right now. Her favorite player on my team is the goalie. So, because he wears a nice bright colored uniform. So
there you go.
That might put in perspective her priorities on the field anyhow. But
seriously, yeah.
I think making sure she's very, very well aware of that she's valued mutually exclusive to how many saves she makes or how many goals, or even if she kicks the ball at all, to be fair, sometimes. And so that's a major, major challenge, right? Because in my world, everything's results oriented, right? Even at the Division III level, like, results are important. Like, that's what we are here to do. We're here to win soccer games, and we can get into it a little bit more later on. But it's a real culture struggle, right? To be in that moment and recognize what actually matters. And that's obviously my daughter developing into someone who's kind, who's respectful, who loves people well, who is physically active. Like, obviously that's a huge thing for me as well. Like, being able to use the body that you're given. So, but then it's also like, she's 6. So it's like, just relax, like, just have fun and do your best.
I'll come back to you and ask you when she's like at 12, at 13, at 14, where
it'll be harder.
Maybe a little bit more real, right? It's actually like, okay, this might actually be real soccer. Maybe then the coaching situation's different. You're second guessing. You're thinking, I don't know what they're doing here, and thinking here. It's definitely tough.
Yeah, but I mean, I think just like anything else, right? Like, the better habits I can get into as a parent on the sideline, and the better habits I can instill into my daughter now, will be reflective in 6 years from now, when she is a little bit more competitive and she cares a lot more about what her teammates think of her or what her coach thinks of her. But helping her recognize and set some foundations behaviorally, but also like in her self-worth and in her identity, hopefully, right? Hopefully, shows its effects later on. And again, not just in sport, but in life as well, right? It's a real balance where you want to aim for success. You aim for excellence, right? But your identity isn't tied to that result. So again, we're talking about 6-year-olds. We're talking about 6-year-olds,
but I hear it. Like, I talk to parents. So I talked to somebody a couple months ago. As a dad, his kid's like 9 or he's 8, and it's like his first year of travel. But he's in a more competitive club, and some of those kids have been doing like pre-academy for 2 years already. And he's like, I hear the anxiety like in the dad's voice about
Yeah.
I think he's behind. Like we just kind of tried out on a whim. We didn't think we'd make the team, but we did, and
Right.
now it's really competitive. And it's like so, and like he's coming from a good place because he wants his son to really like enjoy it. And part of that is
Yeah.
being good. Part of that is results oriented. Like it's no fun to go out there and be out of your depth and be
Right.
overwhelmed every week, right? So it's always such a fine line, and I always kind of like really try to be as nuanced as possible with it when parents are asking me questions about, do they need more training or help? Should they look for a different team, whether it's going up or down a level? Like it's such a tough one. I think enjoying it obviously is what I always come back to. But I think you make a great point of like, can we tie it to just building some of those life skills and that like self-efficacy, the self-esteem, which is hard in a results thing because you think, all right, I won, I'm good, I
Sure.
lost, I'm bad, right? And that I think is kind of always a challenge. But it
Yeah.
sounds like from what you've said, that's obviously something we're starting now at 6 years old. But even in your role at Division 3 within University of Valley Forge, like how do you see that manifest, or how do you try to communicate that within your program?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of even just to bridge that gap, I think one of the things that you see 16, 17, 18 years old, when they're in these spots, when they're trying to make these decisions about recruiting and where should they go next. Am I D1? Am I D2, D3, junior college, NAI? What are my options? Is there a professional opportunity for me out of high school? Like, have I been in an academy type system where there's an opportunity for me to play? Um, where I'm getting in conversations in the recruiting process with young men, and they're just not sure if they want to play, right? Or they get to their freshman year and they're just like, man, I'm tired. Like
Mm.
the passion and their love for the game is fizzled. Um, and it might not necessarily be anybody's fault, but it's just a lot, right? And for some of them, it could be a specific coach's fault or a parent's fault, or even the player themselves putting a lot of pressure on themselves. And they get to that spot and they're just like, man, this is a lot. I'm done. I'm done with this. I gave it a shot. I reached my goal. I played in college, but now, hey, I think it's going to be better for my mental health if I step away from the game and just focus on my academia, or I move closer to home and, just play intramurals or things like that. So I think that's a hard balance too when you're getting into this phase. And I think at the college level, it's 100% a balance. It's 100% a recognition of of encouraging young men to recognize who they are and where their worth and identity come from, because you had no control over that over the last 18 years, right?
Mm.
Um, and in some capacity, just like at the club level and just at the high school level, there's still parents on the phone, after the game. They're showing up to games, or maybe some of them are traveling across the country for a week to see a couple games, and they're having a meal and they're letting, and they might not be in line with what the same message is that you're preaching to your players. I had a conversation with the player, one of our post-season evaluations this year, and it was really interesting. We spent the majority of the time talking about his old high school or club coach. I can't remember which one it
Mm.
was. Um, and he was like, that coach is the reason why I'm here, but that's as far as he could take me. I can't keep doing whatever it was. He was talking about something very specific, but like, he's like, I can't any longer just get there. It's like, I have to now move past that because I'm in a new season of my life. And it doesn't now, he wasn't talking like technical or tactical things. He was talking a little bit more of like a mentality standpoint.
Okay.
But, even in those conversations, it's really interesting to see the player's background and how that impacts their transition into the college level. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for college is a time where you go from, like you're saying, having pretty much, I mean, as we get older, we get more freedom in many cases, but it's like everything is kind of structured. And then and everybody's kind of over your shoulder, and there's a lot more like accountability slash, you know, claustrophobia, people on you. And then you go to college and it's like there's just so much more openness, and like the accountability really falls to you. And you see a lot of kids who like definitely are not prepared for that. And it rears its head in all kind of ways. And then there's some kids who are like, okay, you know, everybody's going to feel it a little bit, but it's kind of how they react differently. When you see that, like, let's say you've got a kid who hasn't really necessarily been prepared for that, to take that step of independence, like, what do you guys do within the program? Because I'm sure that happens. It happens for everybody. Every program that you see, like, it's going to happen. I think the difference is that in some, those kids are kind of left to flounder if they're not performing, or even if they are performing, then maybe some of their tendencies and self-destructiveness is kind of overlooked. You know, we think of like the partying and getting into that type of freedom, right? And we are just total like struggling with grades and other academic level and things. So what do you guys try to do to kind of help support, or at least identify that and work with your, you know, literally young men as they step in like a totally new stage of life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it starts so much during the recruiting process. Um, just a little bit about Valley Forge. You know, we're
Yeah,
a bit of
please.
a niche market, right? We're a small Christian Division III university, so a lot of that, you know, kind of carves out the type of student athlete that we're trying to reach. So ultimately, trying to find somebody that fits and wants to be in that environment right away is super important. So that kind of like sets the table. But I think for me, one of the most important things in that recruiting process before they even get, you know, on campus for their freshman year is being extremely honest with guys about where they fit into our program. Now, a lot of times high schoolers are asking, well, am I going to start right away? And it's just such a foolish question, because we don't even tell guys who are in the squad if they're going to start every day, right? And like, you know, you want at the same time, you want guys who are that competitive. You're like, well, what do I need to do to start, right? Like, what do I need to do? So we try to really articulate to guys before they even get to the point where they're committing to the school, hey, where we see you. So we start with like, say, hey, we have 3 tiers that we categorize guys into, a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and we kind of define those tiers with the recruits and say, hey, this is where we see you, so that when they get on campus, they're not like surprised by playing time or depth chart or, you know, whatever the case is. Now, ultimately, that's still really challenging for guys, because when you get to college, right, you're one of 7%, right? 7% of high school student athletes go on to play in college. So you look around and the guy next to you wore a captain's armband. The guy next to him was the
Mm-hmm.
leading goal scorer on his team. The other
Everybody's
guy
been
was,
one of the best, right? Yeah,
yeah,
it's like you're not
everybody
so
was that
special
guy.
anymore.
Yeah, everybody was that guy, right? So you're competing with yourself from every other team now. And so being able to establish that as quickly as you can is extremely important. For us, I guess I'll get into it a couple different ways, but you know, you mentioned the academia, right? That's a huge thing. The transition moment from high school to college is a challenge, and I think it's very rarely intellectually driven, right? Especially at the
Mm.
D3 level, like the high emphasis on the academia. You know, we pride ourselves on being the highest achieving men's team on campus, academically, with our GPA, team GPA, and so forth. So we have a high caliber student athlete that we go after, but when they get here, it's a challenge. So what we do, in an effort to help, we mandate study hall hours. It's like, well, that might seem a little trivial. It's not because we don't trust them intellectually or even academically, but this is a structure to help you be successful with your time and how you spend it.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have a minimum threshold of hours that guys have to meet every week in and out of season until they reach a certain GPA. It's not difficult. Most guys are out of it either the first or second semester. But it's just to establish that pattern of time management. So academically, that's the way that we build our program to structure that, and we check on that weekly. One of my assistant coaches oversees all of the academic side of it, where There are some guys that, depending upon where they were when they came into our program, are going to have to do grade checks weekly, some biweekly, some, have standing meetings. But for the most part, we're just checking in on guys every once in a while to make sure they're set academically. But then we also have a structure, and this isn't unique to Valley Forge. This was my experience as a player. It was also my experience as an assistant coach before taking over this program. So we have a leadership council of 6 guys, a couple captains, a couple upperclassmen, and normally an underclassman or 2 that we see a lot of potential on, that are really interested in leading, that we want to pour into. And each of those guys oversees a small group, 3 or 4 guys that they basically are tasked to check in with every week. Some of them are really intense, like they have like a breakfast meeting and they're like, all right, is everybody okay? Like mental health check, like what's going on? How is everybody feeling? And some of them it's just a little bit more casual. Maybe they're a little bit more relational, just as a little bit more extroverted as the guy is.
Yep.
And I meet with that group every week. And so I check in with that group, and number one, I'm checking on them, the 6 of them. And in turn, they get to tell me how some of their guys are doing. And that's super helpful, because they might not come to me, the coach, with whatever they're showing. They're going to come to the upperclassman who's having lunch with them. That doesn't have to do that. We don't mandate how they do it. But our leadership council does such a great job of connecting with the guys and making sure that, that they're staying out of trouble, that they're doing the things that they're supposed to do. And they obviously have their hand in a lot of the stuff that we do in our off season, because at the Division III, my hands are tied in a lot of ways in what we do when we're not in season. And then kind of the last thing, we do a weekly survey that's primarily a mental health check and physical health check. We just ask them to do a quick survey. It's like a 1 to 10 survey, like how many hours of sleeping, how many meals did you eat weekly, how much water are you drinking, how does your body feel? Because obviously when you get to the middle of the season, most people are at like a 5, right? Like
it's a grind. Everybody's got knocks and little, yeah.
Yeah. So, but then it's like, all right, well, how many hours are you sleeping? So when we have guys that are like generally like, and then we ask them like, how do you feel you're training? Like, do you feel like you're training at your top? Do you feel like and so when we see guys that are like giving themselves scores that are lower than we think, and they're sleeping less than 6 hours a night, and they're, and we can kind of compile all this, we'll call it data, but it's just information, right? That it's like, oh, well, let's talk about this, dude. Like, one of the reasons why your body feels this way is because you're not eating 3 meals a day. You're not seeing the trainer, not because you're injured, but because you need to be paying attention. This is hard. Like, college soccer is physically demanding. And you're sleeping 5 hours a night, dude. Like, it's not easy to do, but we feel like, especially right now, like the mental health of student athletes, obviously it's super documented and it's not good. And so we feel as a staff, like we have a responsibility that we want to at least give our guys an outlet. Are they going to be right all the time when they fill out that survey? No. Are they going to go through the motions sometimes just because coaches are honest about the survey? Yeah. But if we have an opportunity to catch something, the last thing that I want to do is be in a hospital room, right? Somebody who is dealing with mental health. And I have to call parents. Like, I've been in that seat before as a coach, and it's one of the worst feelings. It's the worst. It's worse than losing the last game of the year, right? Because we're talking about young men's lives, right? So again, some of these things are a little trivial, but we want to try to find as many ways to open that door for those conversations, because if we're not taking care of those guys, when it gets hard on the field and they don't feel that they're loved and taken care of by their staff, it's very much easy for them to shut down. Why am I doing what I'm doing if the people that I'm doing it for don't care? And so that's what I train my staff in is, the transfer portal is a real thing, right? Retention is a major part of college soccer. And And the challenge that I put on my staff and myself is there shouldn't be a single person that leaves our program that questions whether or not they were loved by the staff here. They might disagree with us tactically or with our substitutions or how we were running sessions or whatever, but nobody could go to their next location and be like, well, I just don't think that group of coaches cared about me as a young man. That's a huge part for me. That's a major part of everything we do. That's the filter that we filter everything through. Obviously, as a Christian university, right? We use the word discipleship a lot, and that's kind of my main focus here. Paired next to winning soccer games, right? Like, I'm not a pastor, right? I'm a soccer coach, right? But I think that's a huge part for us, and so trying to build things in that we can take care of our student athletes is extremely, extremely important for me.
Yeah. I mean, we've been sitting here talking and we haven't even gotten into like X's and O's and tackles, all that. But it's interesting, like all the different methods you guys have of just checking in with your guys, right? You use the word data, but really just seeing how they're doing. And I think you make a great point as going through my mind, like guys are not always, how many times you just fill out a form because you're this one again, especially we're doing it every week, right? But like, it, like you said, I think you made a key point. It gives them an opportunity to bring something to your attention, right? And I think when a lot of times when we're suffering, especially like men, we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to appear weak. We don't want to appear like we're actually hurting. We want to seem invincible. So those different things can kind of almost be like a way for you, obviously, to check in, but a way for them to communicate with you of like, hey, I might need some help here, even though I don't have the words. I'm afraid of actually talking about this. So I think that's super important. But I have this conversation again a lot when results are not going well, when it's a challenging time. I think it sucks. Everybody knows it sucks, but like it can be a really powerful time of growth. So what do you guys do when you come in like and you're having tough results and guys are feeling the bumps and the bruises and they're like, what am I doing this for? Like what do you try to bring your group back to?
Actually, a friend of ours, kind of talks about this all the time, but like how you define success. And Ryan Gautier, I think, goes back to that all the time. But I think that's huge for us and how we define success, both in our program, but also in our athletics department here is extremely important. Again, the context that we're talking about here is a small Christian university, right? So the mission statement of our athletics department is training student athletes to be Christ-centered leaders through the platform athletics. So like obviously men's soccer for me. So, that's our main primary objective, so coming back to that is extremely important. And so for us, and not unique to Valley Forge, but, most programs, high school, clubs, colleges have some set of core values that drive them, right? Sure. Maybe it's hard work or discipline or perseverance or whatever. But, we have core values in our program. And, obviously I could talk about those things at length because it's what I love and it's my passion next to soccer as well. But we highlight that after every game, right? Like it's really important for us that we highlight both the soccer side of things. So we give out a man of the match ball every game. Doesn't matter what the result of that game is. There's still somebody who deserves that man of the match ball. But then we also give out, we call it, it's an old jersey, old retro jersey that, I dug up in a closet here when I got here. And it's our core value shirt. And that jersey goes to the guy on the team that exemplified one of our core values the best throughout the game. And that showed itself. We do our end of our season awards, and we had 6 guys that were all within 1 or 2 votes of each other as like we call it the Patriot Award at our at our institution. It's basically like who is the best person on your team, right? And that's huge for us. Like building men of character is really, really important. So highlighting that every chance we get is super important. And it's easier for me, right? Because like you mentioned, like I know when I was hired that there were 8 players on the team, right? And we're at 28 now, right? Like I can see that growth But the guy that this is their first year here, they're like, well,
Yeah,
that
it
doesn't
means nothing to them.
like,
Exactly.
that doesn't really matter. Like what matters is what's happening right now. So it's easy for me to zoom out and highlight those things. But I think one of the cool things that happened this year is we had the opportunity, probably for the first time, is we had 5 different alumni come and speak to our guys throughout the season before a game, and they were able to just share their heart and say how thankful they were to this group for making the commitment to this group, because there's been so much turnover. There's been so many guys who would come in for a season and then leave, or come in for half a season and say, I'm out, or whatever it was. And so being able to recognize now that we're building a program and not just a team, and recognizing that there are guys that have gone before them that wore the same jersey, figuratively, we've gotten new jerseys. Okay, relax. That have poured into the program, that care about this program still, is extremely, extremely important. And one of the ways that we do that in the spring as well is we do an alumni game, and we don't have a lot. We're not one of these schools that have, even in just this area, right, that are tradition, that have been around, for decades, right? But it was a really unique and powerful experience for me to be in that huddle at the end of the game and say, hey, like, I'm the outsider here. Like, I'm the only one who's never worn this jersey. Like, I get the privilege to be in this because I get to coach it, but it's everyone obviously surrounding me makes this program what it is. And I think it's moments like that are super important. And I alluded to it before when I was talking about my daughter, and like that foundation that we're building, and recognizing their identity is not in the results, but it's in their perseverance, it's in their effort, it's in their intensity, it's in their decision to separate action and feeling. When you feel defeated, when you feel upset and frustrated, that doesn't determine how hard you go into a tackle. It doesn't determine how badly you want to track back and win a ball, or how badly you want to get on the counter. But that's such a huge challenge. And so when we're seeing guys do that, we want to highlight that, and we want to celebrate that, because that's who we want to be. And I think if we continue to build into that, we're going to see results in wins and losses. Sure. We basically were the same team this year that we were last year, like statistically, but the quality of soccer we played was significantly higher. But even more important, like, the locker room was so much more fun, like so much more connected. The guys were at my house last night. It's Wednesday. Last night, I mean, they crushed 13 dozen cookies that my wife made in like 30 minutes, right? Like, they're playing Uno with my daughter, right? And I think that those are the things that are going to go a lot farther. They're not going to remember necessarily the game that they think that they should have won in conference at the end of the season. At least I hope that they would prefer the memory of playing on the pugs in my backyard with my daughter, showing them how to make s'mores, right? If you can imagine, I have college players who've never had s'mores before. It's unbelievable.
That's big,
right?
Yeah.
But like, just things
that
like
a lot
that.
of college programs can't deliver,
Yeah, I mean, I think for me that's such a huge thing, though. Like, it's such a huge thing. Ultimately, this is a soccer podcast, and obviously I've shared my heart a lot, and we've talked very little soccer, right? Like, but it's about the identity and passion of building young men, for me, as a Christ-centered leaders, but I think ultimately, dudes that are going to be great bosses, CEOs, husbands, right? Fathers, whoever knows I want them to be excellent in whatever it is. And I think building an experience that gives them an opportunity to be successful in those moments is kind of the primary objective. And, I say this on recruiting calls a lot, which obviously it's 2023. So I have a lot of them like this. So it feels a little natural, but like, I always tell them, I'm like, winning is a goal, but it's not the goal. And I think that's something that's hard to say, because I'm so competitive. I love to win, man. I wish we win more games every year, right? Like, that's, but But ultimately, I can sit back and, I can have a conversation with some of the other coaches in my department, or with my wife, and say, hey, like, I can see the development in the program of the young men that we have, and that's something that I can be extremely proud of. Um, I'll share this little story. I mentioned it before. My daughter's favorite player is our goalie. Um, and I've been coaching soccer now for a little over a decade. So I've done senior nights at high school, or when I was an assistant coach, and even when I was here. But for the first time, like, I'm weeping writing the senior night dialogue, because our senior goalkeeper is my daughter's favorite player. Like, and that's why, you know what I mean? So, like,
Yeah.
and she was like so sad. Last night she's like, Abner's never going to come to our house again. And I was like, well, he'll probably come over again, but he's not a soccer boy anymore. Right.
Yeah.
So, it's like those things where it's like, those are the moments for sure that it's like finding where you can get an experience that fits what you want. Cause I'll be honest, this experience is not what everyone wants.
Exactly.
There are guys that having a coach say that winning isn't the goal, that's not for them. And I understand that. And that's okay. Right. Like, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with winning a national championship. I would love to do both, to be fair. Like, I would love to do both. Like, and I think there are coaches that do it well, and they do both well. We're not quite there yet. But for us, the experience that we're trying to build, right now looks a lot more like what's happening off the field and in the locker room than what's on the field. But the goal is that both of them are excellent, right? That's the goal, and that's what we're building. But yeah, to go from 8 players to 28 in the time span that we have, I'm very thankful for the staff and the guys who've committed to being here, and are pouring into the next group of players coming in is extremely exciting.
I love what you said earlier on with the expectations, and I think that this carries with whether you're a college coach, whether you're just a leader in general, and you're trying to create something,
Sure.
whether you're in business trying to talk to partners and network with people, is like setting the right expectations, rather than just kind of promising the world. And I think that that kind of need comes from almost like an insecurity of, hey, I just need to say whatever it is that's going to make this person say yes.
Yeah.
And I know that because I've done that enough times in my life, and I've seen it crash and burn.
Sure.
So slowly started just figuring out that like authenticity piece. Now obviously the college piece is kind of your key role, but I know you've been involved with the youth game too, and so I'm curious of like your thoughts on like finding a fit, or kind of feeling where you're wanted within the youth game. There's not as many options for the youth game usually. There's how competitive you want to be. Obviously, cost is a very real aspect of it in the United States. We are pay to play. We have a lot of great resources, but you gotta sign a check to take advantage of them. So what would you say at the youth level, where maybe people don't have as many options, and sometimes you just kind of gotta make the best situation out of what's less than ideal?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, going back to how you define success, or what's going to be best for your family, is really important. Again, I have my opinion. Similarly to how I run my program, I also know that this is not it's an opinion, right? So I think that's what's good for you is not going to be good for me, and it's not going to be good for my nephew, and might not be good for my daughter. But you have to kind of understand what you're looking to do, especially for players that normally are in like the middle school to early high school. I typically, tell them to go to a place, number one, where you're wanted, right? Where you're valued, that you're more than just, one of 4 teams, who knows what's happening there, that you're being developed, you're cared for by the coaches. Like that should be a no-brainer, right? But if you're concerned about developing, like if you're like, hey, maybe I want to play in college. I don't know if I want to or not. But I always try to tell youth players, like, go where you're wanted and where you feel safe and that you're being developed. And then if you can control it, with that already as the context, play at the highest level where you're getting the most amount of minutes. And for somebody that might be, this level club or this level team or this specific club. But I think using that as kind of a barometer for the decisions that you make is extremely important. My experience is be in a spot where you can continue to play multiple sports. I think that's hugely, hugely important. Again, socially. So for me, those are kind of like the three conversations I have with a lot of like friends of friends ask me because I'm a college soccer coach. They ask my opinion, and I always say, like I'm not an expert, man. I don't have any like scientific background. I can tell you my experience. I can tell you what I see. I can see that most of the guys, as I mentioned before, fizzle out in their freshman year, have been playing soccer only since they were in middle school. But I also have guys that have been playing soccer only since they were 5, and they're thriving, right? So it's gonna be different. Like I have a freshman this year who's only ever played soccer only, no other sport ever, no matter what.
Wow.
And this is the most fun he's ever had. And he's like, this is great. I love this. Give me more of it. You'll catch him on his phone. He's watching whatever league. Like you're like, I didn't even know that league existed. He's watching it. It's like he's like on ESPN 8, the Ocho, and it's like whatever it is. That's the level league he's watching. Like it's crazy. But so that's why I'm saying it's going to be different for everybody. But I think finding a place again where you're safe and you're being poured into and you're developing is a priority. Then finding a place where you can balance as much playing time as possible, where it's the highest level, because you don't want to just be able to dribble around everybody nonstop. And then being in a spot where, again, you're being challenged and you're not just the best player on the team all the time, which I know in some cases is really challenging. Maybe the high school you're at is very small. Maybe the area that you're at is really isolated.
Those are those limitations, exactly.
And you don't have the funds to drive an hour and a half to go train. Like, that's okay. Like, do the best with what's in front of you. Especially, this is the advice, especially when I was a high school coach, that I gave guys all the time. Like, if you want to play in college, there's a program for you. You might have to travel to some other part of the country. You might not win any games. You might, whatever it is, you might not like the coach. You might, whatever it is, but there's a level for everyone that wants to play in college. And I've seen it. Look, my team was that 3 years ago. Like I said, we had 8 guys on the team. If you wanted to play college soccer and you could afford to come to the school, you could have been on my team 3 years ago, right? Like that's what it was. And there are other places like that. And again, the experience that you're going to get at those institutions aren't necessarily worse than what you would get at a Division I school. The quality of soccer will be, like, don't get me wrong, like, but the experience may not.
Yeah. Again, yes, we want to win. Like, we want to play the best soccer we can, develop the best players we can. But then we realize that even if they do become professional, it's like there's this theme that's been coming up with a lot of our guests recently who have had experiences of playing professionally, and then their career ends and they realize they have like nothing, right? It's such a rude awakening. And so from talking to them, I've actually gained a little different perspective on our system here in the U.S. and how it's a little more well-rounded, comprehensive, different parts of the person. And so I think that, again, and because football, we have these relationships and experiences and really what goes into it. So I think a key for me, if we bring it back to the youth game too, is like, do they just enjoy the group they're with, right? Like, like they're saying, like, is the coach obviously creating a safe environment for everybody to learn? Are they like learning and developing? But then, like, do they enjoy the group that they're in? And so I think that's kind of a fitting point here to kind of bring the podcast to an end, Steve. So it's been great. I think I'm sure you could, and I would like to hear, and our audience would love to hear more of those examples and more of the values that you've got at UVF. But we're gonna wrap up like we do every episode, and it's, could you complete the sentence, because football ...
I have an opportunity to impact men's lives for Christ every day.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, we appreciate your insight. We will look forward to you guys continuing to be successful on and off the field at UVF. We'll include your info in the universities as well in the descriptions, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us. We appreciate it. And everyone else, thanks for stepping in with us today, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate it.